I woke before the sun, as I always do. 6 o'clock sharp. No alarm needed, not anymore. After 67 years, my body has grown into its own clock. For 42 of those years, I rose at the same hour to go to work, rain, shine, or snow, and habits like that never truly leave you, even when the world around you has changed. Some mornings I wish I could sleep in, let myself stay in that soft darkness where dreams live, where my bones don't ache and memories don't crowd me. But sleep has a way of slipping from me the older I get, and so I rose as I always do. My house in Suffolk lay quiet around me, the kind of silence that used to feel comforting when it was shared, but now just feels heavy. Once there had been voices here, my wife's laughter, the light chatter of my daughter, the patter of small feet, but now the only sound was the soft creak of old floorboards under my slow steps. My right knee throbbed sharply as I took the stairs, a dull ache that always came when rain was on the way. I gripped the banister with one hand, muttering to myself that the weather forecast never lied when it came through your bones. The kettle had already begun its familiar hiss on the stove. I made myself a pot of strong black tea, the kind I've been drinking since my days inspecting building sites, when a steaming mug was sometimes the only shield against the endless drizzle of English weather. My name is Baxter Hollis, and this house has been mine for nearly 30 years. We bought it when my wife, Deirdre, as I always called her, was still alive, and our daughter, Armina, was just a little girl. Now the house feels far larger than I need, but smaller in spirit, as though the walls themselves have pulled back into silence without them. I carry my tea into the drawing room and lower myself into the worn armchair by the wide window, the one that looks out over the garden. Once that garden was my pride. I kept it clipped, neat, every flower trimmed, every hedge square and proper. I laid out vegetables in orderly rows, and Deirdre would laugh, saying the cabbages looked like soldiers lined up for parade. Now weeds climb high along the edges, strangling out the borders, and the beds grow crooked. Only the patch where I still keep carrots, onions, and a few tomatoes remains in any shape. Too much work for stiff old hands and too little reason when there is no one left to share the harvest with. I sip the tea. It burns my tongue, too hot, always impatient. Deirdre used to tease me about that, saying it was the one habit I'd never outgrow. She was right. It's funny how even after death, the voice of someone you loved can echo in your ear like they're still sitting across from you. The house itself bears my care, but not my heart. As a former inspector, I'd never allow neglect. The beams, roof, and pipes are sound. But there is a lifelessness here that maintenance cannot mend. Photographs on the mantelpiece capture smiles from years gone, but they feel like shells now, like husks of insects pinned in glass. Deirdre's favorite chair remains untouched. I can't bring myself to sit in it. And the rug where Armina once played with her dolls is worn, threadbare, though the laughter that once filled it has long since slipped away. After my tea, I take up the razor for my daily shave. A slow ritual now. My hands are clumsy, and I refuse to use those new buzzing contraptions. Stubbornness, perhaps, or pride. The mirror stares back at me with a face I hardly know. Wrinkles etch deep furrows across my brow. My cheeks sag hollow, my hair almost gone to gray and thinning. Only the eyes remain the same, cold, sharp, pale blue. They are the eyes that made laborers nervous when I inspected their work. Hollis won't miss a crooked nail, they used to mutter. I was hard, uncompromising, and proud of it. Those same eyes now stare back at me and show me the price of that rigidity, not in buildings, but in family. Breakfast is a simple thing. Toast, with butter and a spread of orange marmalade. Then I pull on my boots and step into the garden. Despite the stiffness of my knee, gardening is the one chore I still enjoy. Plants don't argue. They don't hold grudges. They grow if you treat them right. I kneel slowly and pull weeds from the carrot bed, breathing in the earthy smell that rises from damp soil. That's when I hear the familiar creak of the gate. "Good morning, Baxter," calls Gwyneth Paul, my neighbor. She's in her early 60s, a widow like me. She carries herself lightly, and her voice, though lined with years, still has a brightness to it. She steps down the path with a smile. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I straighten, wincing at the ache in my leg. "Morning, Gwyneth. Yes, not bad weather today. You can always find something to complain about." She grins, showing she means no harm. She carries a plate in her hands, covered with a towel. "I made a blueberry pie. Thought you might like some." The scent reaches me before I even lift the cloth, and for a moment my chest tightens. The smell is too familiar. It's weekends. Again, Deirdre laughing in the kitchen as she pulls pastries from the oven. I force myself to nod. "Thank you. You shouldn't have bothered." "It's no trouble," she insists warmly. "I was baking for the grandkids anyway. She is the only one I ever really talk to here." At first, I kept her at arm's length, but over time, her kindness, her pies, her chatter chipped away at the wall I'd built. Not friends, exactly. More like neighbors who have agreed to a truce. We talk briefly about my tomatoes, the forecast, the same small things. She laughs at how much I always end up giving away. I shrug. It's true. I have more than I can eat. When she leaves, I set the pie inside the kitchen and return to the soil. But my mind refuses to stay quiet. It drifts to Armina, my daughter. How long has it been since we last spoke properly? Weeks? Months? It is hard to tell, living alone. Time blends. I remember the fights, the tension that began when she married Orson. I saw at once he wasn't fit for her, too soft, no plans, no strength. I said as much, too sharply. She called me a snob, but she went ahead anyway. I came to the wedding, of course, and sat stone-faced beside Deirdre's tears of joy. I gave them money instead of gifts. Practical, I thought. But a crack had already formed. When her boy, Tobin, was born, I thought maybe that would heal things. For a while it did. He looked at me with the kind of wide-eyed admiration his mother never did. But Orson left, just as I'd expected. Packed up and gone. I should have comforted my daughter then. I should have offered arms, not judgment. But what I gave her was cold words. "I told you so." That was the day something broke between us that has never been mended. The ring of the telephone jars me from memory. I rise slowly, brushing dirt from my knees. Inside, the shrill sound demands my attention. I rarely get calls. Gwyneth drops by in person, and former co-workers have all drifted away into their own retirements. "Hollis here," I answer, voice stiff with habit. "Hi, Dad," Armina's voice. Too cheerful, forced. I tense at once. She never calls without reason. "I'm fine," I say automatically. "And you? Tobin?" "We're fine. Thanks." A pause, then, "Listen, I know it's sudden, but Sunday's Father's Day, and Tobin and I thought we could come over, spend the weekend together. For a moment." I am silent, stunned. Father's Day. I cannot remember the last time that word meant anything in this house. "Sunday?" I ask slowly, almost stalling, trying to understand. "That's the day after tomorrow." "Yes," she says, her voice softening. I know it's short notice. "If you already have plans—" "No," I cut her off quickly, too quickly. "No plans." There's a pause, then her tone warms in a way I haven't heard in years. "Tobin really wants to see you. He's even prepared a gift." Something about this sudden initiative alarmed me. Hermina was not prone to spontaneous decisions, especially when it came to me. "Of course. Come," I said, trying to sound more cordial. "When can I expect you?" I think we can be at your place by lunchtime tomorrow. We'll spend the night, spend Father's Day together, and then leave Monday morning. Tobin to school, me to work. Okay, I nodded, though she couldn't see it. The guest room is ready. I mean, it'll need to be aired out and the linens changed, but don't worry, we'll manage, she said quickly. See you tomorrow, then. See you tomorrow. I hung up the phone and stood in the middle of the hallway trying to sort out my feelings. Excitement about seeing my grandson? Absolutely. Anxiety about Hermina's sudden decision? Definitely. And something else I couldn't or wouldn't identify. Appremonition? Anxiety. Shaking my head, I pushed those thoughts away. We need to get the house ready for the guests. Regardless of my relationship with Hermina, I couldn't afford to host my grandson in a dilapidated home. My paternal status may have been in question, but my reputation as a man who kept his house in order was unshakable. I headed to the guest room and opened the window, letting in fresh air. Then I pulled clean linens from the closet and began methodically making the bed, straightening every fold. The room looked impersonal. No personal belongings, just the necessary. Furniture and a seascape painting on the wall, the perfect embodiment of my current life. Functional, but without a soul. When I finished with the room, I went back to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, figuring out what I need to buy. I didn't have enough for 3 people. I'd have to go to the store. I wasn't sure exactly what Tobin liked to eat now. The kids changed their preferences so quickly. The last time he'd visited me, he'd been 8, and he'd been crazy about macaroni and cheese. But that was almost a year ago. The thought of knowing so little about my only grandson caused a prick of conscience. Whose fault is this? Mine? Her mind's? Circumstances? Probably a little bit of everything, but now I have a chance to make things a little better. 2 days wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I grabbed my jacket and headed to the local supermarket, mentally making a shopping list. Something told me that the coming weekend was going to be extraordinary, though I couldn't imagine how much. I woke up earlier than usual, staring at the ceiling, for a long time before I forced myself up. The dream was disturbing. Dearest face, Hermina crying, Tobin's reproachful gaze. I pushed those visions away and focused on the day ahead. The house needed attention before the family's visit. It was one thing to live surrounded by dusty bookshelves, and quite another to have guests in such a home, especially if those guests are your daughter, who is sure to point out every flaw. After breakfast, I started cleaning. I started in the living room, dusted every surface, vacuumed the carpet, washed the windows. Then I moved to the kitchen, cleaned the cabinets, mopped the floor. The work helped keep my mind off the upcoming meeting, focused on action instead of endlessly running through possible scenarios. Wiping through the photos on the mantelpiece, I lingered on Hermina's graduation picture. She was standing between Dira and me, happy, diploma in hand. Everything was still good then, or so it seemed to me. Perhaps a crack in the relationship had already appeared. I just hadn't noticed it. Busy with work and my standards. Hermina's university years are remembered as a period of relative calm. She studied well, chose a practical specialty in accounting, and we had a common field of conversation. I enjoyed discussing financial strategies with her, happy that my daughter was on a sensible path. And then she met Orson. I still remember the day she brought him over to meet him. Tall, awkward guy with disheveled hair and a dreamy look. An artist. Not just an artist, an experimental artist. His work was a chaotic jumble of color and form, devoid, in my opinion, of meaning or skill. He's talented, Dad, or Mina urged me. You just don't understand modern art. I understand enough to see when a man can't provide for his family, I retorted. What are you going to live on your accountant's salary while he stains canvases? Her face contorted with anger. Not everything is measured in money. Sometimes it's more important to be happy, to do what you love. Happiness doesn't pay the bills, Armina, and it won't buy food for your children if you decide to have them. This Conversation was repeated with variations, always ending the same way, with a slamming door and tears from Deirdre, who begged me to be more understanding. When Hermina announced the engagement, I tried again to get through to her. Think carefully. Marriage is not only romance. It's about living together, solving problems, planning for the future. What do you know about this guy besides the fact that he paints weird pictures? I know he's kind, considerate, and understanding. She cut him off. Unlike some people, the words hurt more than I'd expected. Wasn't I understanding? I'd always wanted the best for her. Always tried to set her on a path that would provide stability and success. The wedding took place in spite of my disapproval. I attended, smiled for the photos, gave the proper toast, but inside gnawed a feeling of wrongness, a premonition of trouble. The first years of their marriage seemed to disprove my fears. They rented an apartment in Ipswich. Herman worked in an accountancy firm. Orson got a job teaching drawing at school. Not that I was impressed. An art teacher is still better than an unemployed artist, but not by much. They were getting by, however, and when Tobin was born, he began to think I might have been wrong. I took another picture, a newborn Tobin in his parents' arms. I remember arriving at the hospital and holding my grandson for the first time. The tiny creature with the wrinkled red face and mop of dark hair evoked feelings I hadn't experienced in a long time. Suddenly, the future made sense, and there was a purpose to see this boy grow up, to pass on everything I knew to him. The first 3 years after Tobin's birth were a period of truce. Her mind and I tacitly put aside our differences for the sake of the child. She brought him to us regularly, let him stay for weekends. I enjoyed being a grandfather more than I realized. I could be different with Tobin. Gentle, patient, attentive, all the things I probably should have been with Hermina, but couldn't be. And then there was Thunder. Orson was gone. He just packed his things and disappeared, leaving a note saying that he was suffocating in the routine and had to find himself. Minna called in the night, sobbing so hard we could barely make out the words. Deirdre went straight to her and I stayed at home. That's how I justified my decision. In truth, I just didn't know what to say to my daughter, how to comfort her. They arrived the next day, Mina with her eyes swollen with tears and little Tobin, confused and quiet. He set the table, made tea, trying to be helpful. We sat in the living room, Dearie hugging her daughter, and I shifted awkwardly from foot to foot, unable to find the right words. "What now?" I finally asked. "What are your plans?" Mina looked up at me with inflamed eyes. "Plans? Dad, my husband, just left me with a 3-year-old child, and you're asking about plans." "That's exactly why I'm asking," I said, trying to sound rational. "You need to think about the future, about Tobin. You can stay here until you decide what to do next. We'll manage on our own." She cut me off. "I have a job. I have an apartment. Of course." I nodded. "I'm just offering to help." There was an awkward pause. Deirdre tried to catch my gaze, silently begging me to say something, comforting, to show emotion, but the words stuck in her throat. "You know, I've always said this marriage was a mistake," I said finally. "Orson was never a reliable man. I saw it from the beginning. It was as if the temperature in the room had dropped." Hermine's face froze. Her eyes widened with shock and pain. "Baxter!" Deirdre exclaimed. "What?" I didn't understand their reaction. I was merely stating a fact. If she had listened to me, then that's enough. Hermina stood up, her voice sounding firm. "We're leaving now. That night changed everything." Dearie came home late, and for the first time in our marriage, she didn't speak to me for 2 days. And when she did, her words burned me. "You know what your problem is, Baxter? You always have to be right. Even when your daughter is heartbroken, it's more important to prove you're right than to support her. What's more important? Being right or preserving your relationship with your only child." I put the picture back and looked at the clock. It was almost noon. Harina had promised to be here for lunch, which meant somewhere between 12 and 2. I had a little time left to finish my preparations. I went to the kitchen and started cooking. Nothing fancy, a roast with vegetables that could be left to languish, in the oven. As I chopped carrots and potatoes, I thought about my upcoming visit. What was the reason for this sudden decision? We hadn't celebrated Father's Day for many years, and the last few meetings had hardly been warm. The sound of a car pulling up made me waz. I went to the window and saw Hermina parking the sedan at the gate. Tobin jumped out of the passenger seat and ran toward the house. I stepped out onto the porch feeling a sense of excitement. "Grandpa." Tobin rushed toward me, wrapping his arms around my waist. He had grown over the year and now reached almost to my chest. "Hello, young man." I put my hand on his shoulder, hesitating for a more demonstrative display of affection. "How was your trip?" "Long," he answered seriously. "We got stuck in traffic near Chelmsford and my mom said a word that can't be repeated. I couldn't hold back a smile." "Really?" Tobin is exaggerating. Hermina approached us carrying a travel bag. She looked tired, but she held herself upright with a dignity that reminded me of Deirdre. "Hello, Papa. Hello, Irina." I made a movement as if I wanted to hug her, but stopped, unsure of the reaction. She froze too, and Themament was gone. "Come into the house. Dinner is almost ready. We brought dessert," Tobin announced, showing the package. Chocolate cake. We entered the house. Tobin ran straight into the living room while Hermina stayed in the hallway, looking around with a strange expression. "You've cleaned up," she remarked. "The house looks neat." "I always keep things tidy," I replied, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "Let me show you to your room. You might want to freshen up from the road." I led them into the guest bedroom where Hermina began unpacking and Tobin explored the dresser and nightstands with curiosity. "Nothing has changed," Mina said, looking around. "The room. The same curtains. The same painting. Why change what works well?" I shrugged. She looked at me with an unreadable expression. "Yes, that's always been your motto, hasn't it?" Suddenly, Tobin interrupted our strained conversation. "Grandpa, I brought you my drawings to show you and also the medal I got for soccer." "Really?" I turned to my grandson, feeling relieved to change the subject. "I'd love to see them. They're in my backpack." Tobin ducked under the bed and pulled out a bright blue backpack. "I'll find it." Mina watched us with an unreadable expression. Something akin to sadness flashed in her eyes when she saw Tobin laying out the drawings on the bed, excitedly talking about each one. "This is our house, this is my school, and this is you." He handed me a piece of paper with a picture of a skinny figure with a disproportionately large head and glasses. "It's very similar," I said seriously, looking at the drawing. "Tobin, let Grandpa unpack," Mina intervened. "We'll have time for drawings later, but I want to show him now," objected the boy. "Grandpa's interested, isn't he?" "Of course." I looked at her, Mina. "I've already finished with the preparations anyway." She pressed her lips together but nodded. "Good. I'll go help in the kitchen then. Dinner's coming soon, isn't it?" "It'll be ready in half an hour," I answered. Hermina left the room, leaving Tobin and me alone. The boy immediately continued to show off his treasures, pulling from his backpack drawings, a medal, and some pebbles and shells he'd collected on the beach. "And this is Mom." He showed another drawing where a female figure stood apart from two others, a small one, apparently Tobin himself, and a tall one with glasses. "Me." "Why is she standing far away?" I asked, noticing the distance between the figures. Tobin shrugged. "I don't know. It just happened that way. Something about this childish drawing touched me more deeply than I had expected. It reflected the reality of our relationship more accurately than any words could. We were a family, formerly, connected, but emotionally separated." "Grandpa, did you know that Mom got you a special Father's Day present?" Tobin asked suddenly, changing the subject. She mentioned something like that? I answered cautiously, but surprises are best not revealed in advance. I won't tell you what it is, the boy assured me. It's just he hesitated as if hesitating. So do your mom. I'm just glad we came to see you. I'm glad too, Tobin. I reached out and ruffled his hair. I'm glad. We continued looking at the drawings, and I noticed that many of them depicted me, the grandfather the boy saw only a few times a year. I seemed to occupy more space in his thoughts than I had realized. 20 minutes later, Mina called us in for lunch. As we descended the stairs, I watched Tobin run ahead, full of energy and excitement. The contrast between his genuine joy at the visit and Hermina's tense restraint was stark. At dinner, the contrast became even more obvious. Tobin chattered away, talking about school, friends, soccer. I asked questions, trying to show interest in his life. Mina was mostly silent, intervening only to gently correct Herson when he exaggerated or jumped from topic to topic. And then the coach said I was the best on the team. Tobin proudly reported, describing his soccer accomplishments. He said you were the most diligent, Hermina corrected him, which is just as important. But it's almost the same, objected the boy. Hard work is more important than talent, I pointed out. Talent without labor is worthless. Hermina looked at me in surprise, as if she hadn't expected to hear such a statement. What? I asked, noticing the look in her eyes. Nothing, she shook her head. I just didn't think you felt that way. Why? You always seemed more interested in results than effort, she said carefully. I wanted to object but stopped myself. Was she right? Had I valued her effort as a child or only her accomplishments? Perhaps that was where the root of our problems lay. Without noticing the tension, Tobin continued to tell me about his school, his friends, his teachers. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself smiling as I listened to him. When our gazes crossed with Hermina over the boy's head, something akin to sadness flashed in her eyes for a moment, or regret, but she quickly averted her gaze, returning to her plate. Grandfather, will you show me the garden this afternoon? Tobin asked. Is that big apple tree still growing there? Of course, I nodded. And not just apple trees, I have strawberries, Topic. The boy's eyes lit up. Real strawberries from the bush, the very real. I could not hold back a smile at his delight, and much tastier than the store strawberries. Mom, can I go with Grandpa to the garden this afternoon? Tobin turned to Hermina. Of course, she nodded. Just don't get your new t-shirt dirty. Lunch ended in a relatively calm atmosphere. While Hermina cleared the table, refusing my help, Tobin and I went out into the garden. Watching the boy excitedly explore the strawberry beds and run around the apple trees, I felt a strange peacefulness. Everything with him was simple and sincere, without the weight of past resentments and unresolved conflicts. Through the kitchen window, I could see Hermina watching us. Her face was thoughtful, tinged with sadness. What was going through her mind? What was she thinking? Looking at her father and son, finding common ground despite their infrequent meetings. And why had she decided to come now after so many years? Of strained relations? Sunday morning was surprisingly clear. The sun was shining through the gaps in the curtains, painting golden trails on the floor. I woke up early as usual, but stayed awake, listening to the sounds of the house. It was unusual to hear footsteps on the second floor, muffled voices, the sound of water running in the bathroom. The house that for years had known only my solitude was once again, if only briefly, inhabited. It was about 7 when I decided to get up. I put on the old robe Dear had given me 15 years ago. Shabby, but still good, like most things in my house. As I walked down the stairs, I heard Tobin's voice in the kitchen. Is he awake yet? Unusual for a kid his age. As I entered the kitchen, I saw my grandson sitting at the table with colored pencils and paper. He was so engrossed in his work that he didn't notice me right away. "Good morning," I said, and the boy flinched in surprise. "Grandfather." He quickly turned the paper over. "You weren't supposed to see that? I'm sorry." I held up my hands in a conciliatory gesture. "I won't look. What are you doing up so early?" "Nothing." He was clearly trying to look innocent, which only made me more suspicious. "Just drawing at 7 in the morning on a Sunday. Mom said it's a special day." He shrugged. "Father's Day. She woke me up early so I'd have time to—" He stammered, apparently realizing he was giving away a secret. "In time for what?" I couldn't help smiling at the serious look on his face. "Nothing." Tobin hastily gathered his pencils. "I'm going upstairs. It's a surprise, Grandpa." He ran out of the kitchen, clutching his art supplies to his chest. I shook my head, amazed at this enthusiasm. Father's Day. When Armina was a child, this holiday usually passed unnoticed. Maybe a card bought by Dearie, signed by her daughter, sometimes a tie or socks. Practical gifts that I appreciated more than sentimental. Trinkets. But never had there been such enthusiasm, such secrecy. I put the kettle on and began to prepare breakfast. Nothing special. Eggs, bacon, toast. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just cooking for myself. It was a strange feeling, both. Pleasant and unsettling at the same time. It was nice to know that the house was full again, even if only for a little while. It was unsettling because of the uncertainty of my relationship with Hermina, because of the unclear purpose of this visit. Mina came downstairs when I was already setting out the plates. She looked put together with her hair impeccably styled, and in a neat blouse as if she were going to a business meeting, not a family breakfast. The only thing that gave away her tension was her slightly compressed lips and her hands clasped behind her back. "Sonam, good morning," she said, stopping, in the kitchen doorway. "Was Tobin here yet?" "Yes, but he ran off on some mysterious mission," he answered, pouring the tea. "Something to do with Father's Day, I think." She nodded, not commenting. "I made breakfast," I pointed to the table. "Nothing special, but thank you." She sat down at the tea table cautiously, as if expecting a catch. "It looks good." We sat in awkward silence until Tobin appeared, clutching something hidden behind his back. "Happy Father's Day, Grandpa," he exclaimed, holding out a homemade card to me. "I drew it myself." The card was made of a piece of paper folded in half. I was standing next to Tobin, judging by my glasses and gray hair. We were holding hands, and a huge, smiling sun shone above us. Inside, an uneven, childish handwriting was written to the best grandpa in the world. "Love you, Tobin." I felt something tighten in my chest. When was the last time I had received something so sincere? When was the last time someone told me they loved me? "Thank you, Tobin," I said, trying to make my voice sound normal. "It's a very, very nice card." "Do you really like it?" His eyes shone with pride. "I've been drawing the sun for a long time." I put it carefully on the table. "I'll put it on the mantelpiece so I can see it every day." Mina watched us with an unreadable expression. Something flashed in her eyes. Regret, sadness, determination. She quickly looked away when she noticed I was looking at her. "Sit down to breakfast, Tobin," she said. "The eggs will get cold." Breakfast took place in a strange atmosphere. Tobin chatted as usual, talking about yesterday's adventures in the garden, about the giant beetle he had found under the apple tree, about his plans to build a pillow fort in the living room. Hermina kept the conversation short, smiling at her son, but her smile didn't reach his eyes. She was polite to me, passing the salt, thanking me for the tea, asking if I should bring more toast. But there was tension in her every movement, in every word. "Are we going to the park today?" "Grandfather?" Tobin asked, pushing the empty plate away. I looked at her, Mina, not sure if that was part of their plans. We have other plans for today, honey, she said softly. Remember we said today was a special day. Father's Day, announced the boy proudly. And we have a present. Quite right. Mina got up from the table. Tobin helped me put the dishes away, and then we'll give Grandpa his present. I offered to help, but Hermina insisted they could do it themselves. I left for the living room, feeling strangely uneasy. Something about my daughter's behavior alarmed me, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. In my life, I'd come to trust my instincts. They rarely failed me on construction sites, and now they were literally screaming danger. I sat back in my chair looking at Tobin's postcard. A child's drawing, naive and sincere. The boy saw me as someone worthy of love and admiration. A grandfather. Someone good to hold hands with under the shining sun. Not a harsh critic, not a destroyer. Of family happiness, as Hermina probably saw me. Soon they joined me in the parlor. Mina was carrying a medium-sized box neatly wrapped in dark blue paper and tied with a silver ribbon. Tobin walked beside her, strangely subdued and tense. "Happy Father's Day, Dad," Hermina said, holding out the box to me. Her voice sounded flat without much emotion. "From both of us." I accepted the gift, surprised by its weight. The box was lighter than it looked. Something inside me was even more wary. "Thank you," I said, examining the package. "Very unexpected." I was about to untie the ribbon when Tobin suddenly shrieked. "Grandpa, don't open it!" His voice was full of such genuine terror that I froze. Hermina turned sharply toward her son, her eyes widened with surprise and alarm. "Why?" I asked, looking at my grandson, who stood with an expression of genuine fear on his face. "Can't you see?" he whispered, pointing to the box. I took a closer look at the gift, and then I noticed what I'd missed at first. The small holes in the wrapping paper, barely visible, as if made with a needle. Why? My heart skipped a beat when a memory came to mind. The exact same holes we'd made in the box when dear Dre brought home a thrust chick that had fallen out of the nest. Air holes. "What's in the box, Mina?" I asked, slowly raising my eyes to my daughter. She stood motionless, her fingers nervously tugging at the hem of her blouse. Her face was frozen in a mask of calm, but her eyes betrayed a storm of emotion. "Open and find out," she said quietly. "Mom, no!" Tobin exclaimed, taking a step toward her. "I told you it was wrong, Tobin. We discussed this," said Hermina sharply. "Go to your room." "No." The boy shook his head stubbornly. "I'm not leaving." I stared at them, trying to figure out what was going on. What family drama was unfolding in front of me? What could have been in that box that had caused Tobin to have such a reaction? With a growing sense of unease, I began Taunty the tape. My fingers trembled slightly. From age or exertion, I didn't know. The silver ribbon gave way, and I carefully removed the lid. Inside, on a bed of newspapers, lay a dead bird. A thrush, just like the one dear Dre had nursed, rescued from the cat's clutches. A bird that had lived in our garden for years, that Dearie had fed from her hand, that she had called our little friend. A bird that died when I forgot to close the garden door and the neighbor's cat snuck in. I froze looking at the dead bird. The memories came over me with such force that for a moment I thought I heard De'Ara's voice. "How could you be so careless, Baxter? You knew how important she was to me." "What is it?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. "Septon. A thrush," Hermina answered calmly. "A symbol of everything you've ever destroyed with your coldness and neglect." Tobin stood beside her, his eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean to, Grandfather. I told Mom it was a bad idea, but she wouldn't listen. Tobin, upstairs now." Her mind's voice was so commanding that the boy ran out of the room sobbing. We were left alone, me still holding the box with the dead bird and my daughter standing opposite, with an expression of grim satisfaction on her face. "Why?" was all I could squeeze out. "Don't you understand?" Harina took a step toward me. This bird is everything you've ever loved and lost through your own stupidity and callousness. Mom adored that thrush, and you didn't even bother to close the door. A little thing not worth mentioning. Is that what you said? It wasn't a trifle to her. I set the box on the table, fearing I might drop it from the trembling in my hands. That was 20 years ago, Mina, and you think pain has a statute of limitations? Her voice trembled. You broke Mom's heart then, as you've broken it so many times before and since, with your nagging, your high standards, your inability to see what's important to other people. Saku, I've always wanted the best for you, I said, feeling. The protective walls I'd built over the years begin to crumble. The best by your standard, she was almost shouting now. Have you ever asked what we want? What's important to us? When Orson left, you didn't even try to comfort me. All you cared about was saying, I told you so. I was silent, unable to find the words. What could I say? That she was right? That I really was callous, unable to understand the feelings of those closest to me? That I'd spent years building my life on a foundation of rules and standards, not noticing how my relationship with my only daughter was crumbling. Why did you come here? And I finally asked, Onam, to show me the dead bird and remind me what a terrible father I was? She looked at me with a long stare, as if seeing me for the first time. I came to end it, she said quietly, to put a stop to it, to make you realize that your actions have consequences, that you can't just shut yourself off from the world with your rules and standards to make you feel some of the pain you've caused me. And Tobin? Is he part of this plan? Something twitched in her eyes, the first sign of doubt I saw. No, she shook her head. He wasn't supposed to know, but he happened to see the bird while I was preparing a gift. I tried to explain it to him, but he's too young to understand. Or wise enough to see that it's wrong, I said quietly. We stood looking at each other across the chasm of years of hurt and misunderstanding. The box with the dead bird lay between us, a cruel symbol of everything that had gone wrong in our relationship. I felt something inside me shift. Shock and confusion were replaced by a growing anger. A dead bird in a gift box on Father's Day from my own daughter. This was out of line. What kind of savagery is this? My voice was quiet, but it had a distinctly icy quality to it. You came to my house with your grandson to give me a dead bird. What is wrong with you, Hermina? She stood across from me, with her arms crossed over her chest, looking me in the eye with defiance. What's wrong with you, Daddy? She retorted. For 40 years, I lived with a man who valued nothing but his own rules and standards, who saw nothing but work, and how everything and everyone around him didn't fit his idea of right. I worked to provide for you and your mother, I objected, feeling the blood rush to my face, so you could have a roof over your head, food on the table, and education so that you could afford what I was deprived of at your age. A roof, food, education. She shook her head. Yes, you provided all that. But where was the warmth, Daddy? Where was the support? Where were the hugs when I fell and broke my knees? Where were the words of encouragement when I was afraid of failing? My exams? Where was the understanding when I fell in love and wanted to get married? I opened my mouth to object, but she didn't let me get a word in. Do you remember what you said to me on my wedding day? Her voice trembled. You came up to me before the ceremony and said, I hope you don't regret this decision, Armina, because if you do, I won't say I warned you. And you smiled. Daddy smiled as you said those words. I vaguely remembered that moment. Had I really said that? And with a smile? In my memory, it was just a light, joking comment. But judging by the way Hermina's voice trembled, those words carried a different weight for her. I didn't mean to hurt you, I said, but it sounded unconvincing even to me. Of course you didn't, she grinned bitterly. You never mean to offend. You just tell the truth as you see it without thinking about how that truth hurts other people. I shifted my gaze to the box with the dead bird. And this is your revenge? I pointed at the thrush. For all my sins? It's not revenge. Hermina shook her head. It's a reminder, a symbol. Remember how you felt about that bird your mother loved so much? Like a little nuisance, a source of noise and dirt. You complained all the time that it pecked your favorite cherry tree, that it made too much fluff in the house. And then when you forgot to close the door and the neighbor's cat got in, it was an accident. I didn't mean for the bird to get hurt. Of course you didn't. Hermina nodded. But it was because of your carelessness, because you didn't pay attention to what was important to Mom. And you know what the worst part was? When she was crying over the dead bird, you said, "Dear Dre, it's just a bird. You shouldn't get so upset. Over little things." I shuddered. I remembered those words clearly. I also remembered the look on DR's face when she looked up at me, eyes full of tears and disbelief. At the time, I'd written off her reaction as the over-emotionalism typical of women. But now, years later, I was beginning to realize how callous my words had been. It was the same way you treated all of us, Mina continued. Our feelings, our desires, our dreams, anything that didn't fit your idea of what was right was a little thing not worth paying attention to, including my love for Orson. Orson dumped you. I couldn't take it anymore. Abandoned you with a small child in your arms. I was right about him from the beginning. Yes, he left. Mina nodded. But do you know why? Because he couldn't bear to live in the shadow of your disapproval. Every family dinner, every holiday, you found a way to show that you thought he was unworthy, that he was a mistake I made against your wise counsel. Nonsense. I cut him off. He left because he was a weakling, incapable of taking responsibility for his family. I had nothing to do with it. Of course, Minna grinned bitterly. It's never your fault, is it? It's always someone else's fault. Not responsible enough, not serious, enough, not smart enough to meet your standards. At that moment, Tobin appeared in the doorway of the living room. His eyes were red from crying. He had obviously heard our argument. Please don't fight, he asked in a trembling voice. Mina immediately changed her tone, turning to her son. Tobin, I told you to go upstairs. I don't want you to fight, the boy repeated. Grandpa, I'm sorry. I couldn't stop, Mom. I tried. I really did. I looked at my grandson, so small and frightened in the middle of an adult conflict, and felt my anger recede, replaced by fatigue and sadness. Come here, Tobin. I sat down in the chair and held out my hand. The boy approached hesitantly. You didn't do anything wrong. You know these are adult problems, and you shouldn't feel guilty. But Agnew, he whispered. I saw Mommy put the bird in the box last night when you were already asleep. I went down for a drink of water and I saw it. Hermina turned pale. Tobin, we discussed it. I explained it to you. You said it would help Grandfather understand something important. The boy interrupted her. But I don't see how a dead bird can help. Birds should be buried in the garden, not given in boxes. Wisdom from the mouth of a child. I put my hand on my grandson's shoulder. You're absolutely right, Tobin, and we will bury this bird properly. But first, your mother and I have to talk. No, said Hermina firmly. We've already said everything to each other. Tobin, pack your things. We're leaving now, the boy asked fearfully. But we were supposed to stay until tomorrow. There's been a change of plans. Hermina cut him off. We're going back home. Hermina? I tried to speak calmly, though I was seething inside. You can't just run away after what you did. We have to talk. We've been talking for 40 years, Dad, she replied tiredly. And nothing has changed. You still think you're always right, that your way of looking at the world is the only way, that everyone else is just not up to your standards. That's not fair, I said. I've always wanted the best for you, the best by your standards. Hermina raised her voice. Never asking what I want. You've suffocated my life with your expectations, your ideas of how things should be. Tobin shifted his gaze from his mother to me, clearly frightened by the intensity of the argument. I could see his lips quivering, his fists clenching, trying to hold back tears. Maybe we should continue this conversation when Tobin can't hear. I suggested, nodding at my grandson. Hermina took a deep breath as if trying to calm down. You're right about that. Tobin, please go upstairs and pack your things. But I don't want to leave, exclaimed the boy. I want to stay with Grandpa. We were supposed to go fishing tomorrow. You promised. Tobin? Herman's voice sounded tired but determined. Go upstairs. Now the boy looked at me with despair, but I nodded. Listen to your mom, Tobin. Everything will be all right. He wandered reluctantly toward the stairs, casting a last glance at us over his shoulder. As soon as his footsteps died down at the top of the stairs, Hermina turned tome. I didn't plan all this, she said quietly. Not like this, the bird. It was a stupid idea. I found it yesterday in the garden, already dead, and it seemed like a sign, a reminder of what happened all those years ago. Why did you come here in the first place? I asked, feeling the fatigue creeping over my shoulders. If you hate me so much, why all the Father's Day drama? I don't hate you. Armina shook her head. If I did, it would be easier for me. Yeah, I wanted to end it once and for all, to tell you everything that has built up over the years, to show you how your actions, your words have hurt me, and then walk away with a clear conscience knowing that at least I tried. Tried what? I don't understand. To reach out to you. Her voice trembled. To make you see what you're really like. Not the perfect father who always knows what's best, but the man who destroyed his family out of the best of intentions. I felt something clench in my chest. Was she really right? Was I really so blind, so caught up in my ideas of what was right that I couldn't see how my actions were affecting my loved ones? I never meant to hurt you, I said quietly. Or your mother, or Tobin. I know, Mina nodded. That's the irony of it all. You hurt without wanting to just because you couldn't or wouldn't see beyond your own nose because your rightness was always more important than other people's feelings. That's not fair, I objected. I've always cared about you, always tried to protect you from making mistakes. If you'd listened to me about Orson, Seem grinned bitterly. Even now you can't resist. I told you so. Even now, being right is more important than trying to understand me. I opened my mouth to object, but I suddenly realized that she was right. I was really going back to being right again. Again, even in this moment of confrontation, trying to prove myself right instead of listening. I'm tired of this, Daddy, Mina said quietly. Tired of fighting your standards, your expectations. Tired of feeling like I'll never be good enough for you. We looked at each other across the chasm of years of hurt, misunderstanding, and unspoken words. Two people bound by blood, yet solely into each other. I'll take Tobin and leave, she said at last. Is son, we both need space and time to think now? I asked, feeling something inside me snap at the thought that I might not see my grandson again. It's late. Their roads could be dangerous. We'll manage, Mina cut off. I can't stay here after all this. What about Tobin? I asked. He doesn't want to leave. He's a child, Armina said firmly. He doesn't understand all this, and I don't want him to come between us like I once came between you and Mom. I wanted to object, to say that she was wrong, that the situations were completely different. But part of me understood her concerns. I didn't want Tobin to get hurt because of our differences. Okay, I finally said. If you think it's for the best? Hermina nodded and headed for the stairs. An hour later, they were ready to leave. Tobin looked distressed. His eyes were still red from crying. He clutched his backpack tightly in his hands, as if it were the last bastion of stability in a world that had suddenly turned upside down. We're ready, Mina said. Tobin, say goodbye to your grandfather. The boy looked at me with such sadness that my heart sank. "Goodbye, Grandpa. I'm sorry about the bird. You have nothing to apologize for. I got down on one knee despite the pain to be at his eye level. It wasn't your fault. I'll call you when we get home," Hermina said as she opened the door. "Tobin, let's go." They walked out into the beginning rain, quickly running to the car. I stood in the doorway watching Hermina help Tobin into the car. "Buckle him in. Get behind the wheel." The engine started. The headlights illuminated the wet driveway and the car started. The last thing I saw was Tobin's face pressed against the back window, his small palm waving goodbye. I closed the door and walked back into the empty living room. The house had fallen into silence again. But now that silence seemed deafening, unbearable. The box with the dead bird still stood on the table, a silent reminder of how I had failed. My family. The house had never seemed so empty to me as it did that evening. I wandered slowly from room to room, unable to find my place. The silence pressed on my ears, reminding me of the sound of Tobin's childish laughter, the creaking of the floorboards beneath Hermina's light footsteps. The box with the dead bird still stood on the coffee table like a silent accusation. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. The bird that had once been a symbol of a broken relationship with Dearie was now a symbol of a final break with her daughter. There were traces of their presence in the kitchen, Tobin's baby mug of unfinished cocoa, the napkin with the drawing he'd sketched at breakfast. I sank into a chair and stared into space, trying to realize what had happened. How had a day that was supposed to be a celebration turned into a disaster? The clock on the wall showed dark p.m., but it seemed like it had been forever since they'd left. I didn't feel hungry, even though I hadn't eaten anything since lunch. My thoughts swirled around Hermina's words, her accusations, her pain that burst through years of restrained emotion. "You've suffocated my life with your expectations, your ideas of how things should be." Was it really true? Had I, in wanting the best for my daughter, really taken away her freedom of choice, her right to make her own mistakes and decisions? I stood up and poured myself a whiskey, a rare pleasure that I usually allowed only on special occasions. Tonight was such an occasion. The amber liquid burned my throat, but it didn't bring relief. Images from the past came to mind. Mina, a little girl showing me a drawing, and me telling her that the tree couldn't be purple. Her face dims. She takes the drawing away and never shows me her creations again. Here she is, a teenager talking about wanting to be an artist, and I explain why it's an impractical choice. Why? Accounting or law will give her a stable future. She listens, nods, and enrolls in the economics department. Here she is, a grown woman, introducing Orson Tome, and I don't hide my skepticism. I don't try to see what she sees. Every time I was sure I was acting in her best interest, that I was protecting her from disappointments, from bad decisions, from the difficulties I'd faced in life. But where was the warmth, Daddy? Where was the support? I finished my whiskey and looked at the picture on the mantelpiece. Deara, with little Mina in her arms, both smiling at the camera. I remembered that day. We were in the park. Dearie was feeding the ducks, and I was grumbling that they were only polluting the pond. She paid no attention to my words, laughing with her daughter, throwing bread into the water and cheering as the birds swam closer. Deirdre was always a counterbalance to my strictness. She knew how to find joy in the little things, to see beauty where I saw only imperfections. She was the warmth and light of our family, while I provided stability and order. When she died, that balance was broken. All that was left were misstandards, my rules, my coldness. And from what Armina said, it wasn't enough. Not enough at all. I went upstairs to my bedroom, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. Memories and thoughts swirled in, my head keeping me awake. I opened the closet and pulled out an old box of photos I hadn't put on the shelves. I sat down on the bed and started going through the pictures, immersing myself in the past. Here's a wedding picture of me and Dearie, so young, so hopeful. I remember how nervous I was that day, how afraid something would go wrong. Dearie, on the other hand, was glowing with happiness, oblivious to the little problems that did arise. Of course, here's her Mina in the hospital, newborn, tiny, with a red, wrinkled face. I remember my fear when the nurse first let me hold that little bundle. I remember being afraid of doing something wrong, of hurting her with my awkwardness. Maybe that fear, the fear of hurting, of making a mistake, was what defined my paternity. I kept going through the photos, and with each snapshot it became clearer and clearer. I was always standing a little off to the side, even in family photos, always a little aloof, always with a serious expression on my face, while Deirdre and Hermina were smiling, hugging, glowing with joy. I couldn't remember the last time I hugged my daughter. Maybe at her graduation or at her wedding. These moments, which should have been filled with warmth and closeness, were blurred in my memory, overlapped with memories of worrying about organizational details, about expenses, about the practicalities. The hands of the clock were showing, well past midnight when I heard a light knock on the bedroom door. It was so quiet. I thought at first it was just me, but then it came again, a little louder. "Who's there?" I asked, putting the pictures aside. The door opened, and a small figure in pajamas slipped through. "Tobin, I couldn't believe my eyes. What are you doing here? How did you don't be angry, Grandpa," he whispered, closing the door behind him. "I'm back alone." I got out of bed, not knowing whether to be happy or worried. "How did you get here? Does Hermina know?" The boy shook his head, crumpling the hem of his pajama shirt in his hands. "No. She thinks I'm asleep. She went to bed early, and she was very upset, and she was crying into her pillow. Thought I couldn't hear." I felt my heart clench. The image of Hermine crying brought a wave of guilt and regret. "But how did you get here? It's miles on a bicycle." Tobin shrugged as if it were the most common thing in the world. "I know the way. We came by car and the moon was shining. It wasn't very dark. I didn't know whether to admire his courage or be horrified by his recklessness. A 9-year-old boy alone at night on a country road. The thought of what could have happened made my blood run cold." "Tobin, it's very dangerous. It tried to be stern but not scary. Your mom must be freaking out with worry." "She doesn't know," he repeated. "I left pillows under the blanket like they do in the movies and a note just in case that I'm at your place and everything's okay." I sighed, realizing that I needed to call her Mina immediately. But before I did, I wanted to understand, why did you— "Come back, Tobin, what's wrong?" The boy looked at me with his serious eyes so similar to Hermina's eyes as a child. "I wanted to apologize, Grandpa, for the bird. I should have tried harder to stop Mom. I knew it was a bad idea, but I couldn't convince her. I knelt down despite the pain to be at his eye level. "Tobin, listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong. You don't have to apologize. These are adult issues and you shouldn't feel responsible for them. But I love you both," his voice trembled. "And I don't want you to fight over me." "You and your mom aren't fighting over you," I said softly. "Your mom and I have some differences that started long before you were born. It has nothing to do with you, Shonatan. Mom said we weren't coming to see you anymore." Tobin whispered, and I could see the tears in his eyes. "She said, you're not a good person. But I know that's not true. You're the best grandpa ever." I felt something breaking inside. So, Armina had decided to end the relationship for good, to deprive me of seeing my grandson. It was more painful than I could have imagined. "Your mom is very upset right now," I said carefully, choosing my words. "Sometimes when people are upset, they say things they don't really mean. Give her time to calm down and maybe she'll change her mind. And if she doesn't, Tobin asked stubbornly, if she doesn't change, I don't want to ever see you again. He threw himself around my neck, wrapping his small arms around me, and I felt his body shake with sobs. Awkwardly, unaccustomed to such displays of affection, I hugged him back, feeling something. Warm spread in my chest. It's going to be okay, Tobin, I whispered, not knowing if it was true. We'll figure something out. We stood like that for a while until his sobs subsided. Then I pulled away and gently wiped the tears from his face. Now we need to call your mom. She must be worried sick. She's going to be mad, Tobin sighed. Both at me and at you. Maybe, I agreed. But she has a right to know where you are and that you're okay. That's what responsible adults do. I took his hand and we went downstairs to the phone. It was almost 2 in the morning, and I imagined how Man would feel if she woke up and found her son wasn't home. I dialed the number she had left for an emergency call. The receiver was picked up almost instantly, as if she was sitting right next to the phone. Tobin? Her voice sounded worried, broken. It's Baxter, I said. Tobin's here with me. He's okay. Oh my God, she exhaled with such relief that I realized she'd already discovered his absence. I just found his note. I was about to call the police. He rode his bike, I explained. He wanted to talk to me. Shanuan, I'm coming to get him right now, she sounded steely. Don't go anywhere. Of course, I agreed. Well, be waiting. She hung up without saying goodbye. I turned to Tobin, who was standing next to me with a guilty look. Mom's coming to get you. She was really worried. She's mad, isn't she? He asked, fiddling with a button on his pajamas. She's worried, I corrected him. It's normal for parents to worry about their children. I led him into the kitchen, poured a glass of milk, and took out the cookies Gwyneth had, baked. Tobin sat at the table, his feet dangling off the floor, chewing melancholically. Grandfather, he said suddenly, breaking the silence. Why can't adults just make up when they fight? Jason, my friend, and I sometimes fight over toys or a spot on the soccer team, but then we always make up. Why can't adults do that? I sighed, trying to find the words to explain the complexities of adult relationships to a child. Hold grudges, Tobin. Sometimes for years, and then it becomes very difficult to forgive and forget. It's like if Jason didn't just take your toy once without asking, but did it every day for years, and each time you'd be a little angry, but you wouldn't tell him about it, and then one day you'd get mad and tell him all at once. It'd be hard to make up after that, wouldn't it? Tobin thought, wrinkling his forehead. But you could try, couldn't you? If you really want to be friends. Out of themoth of a baby, as they say. I looked at my grandson, amazed at the simplicity and wisdom of his words. Indeed, why not try? If the relationship with my daughter is really important to me, why can't I take the first step, admit my mistakes, apologize, try to understand her point of view? Because I've never been able to do that, the inner voice replied. Because admitting a mistake for me has always been tantamount to admitting defeat because I've spent my whole life building my identity on the certainty that I'm right. Maybe you're right, Tobin, I said quietly. Sasham, maybe it's worth a try. We sat in silence until we heard the sound of a car pulling up. The headlights illuminated the kitchen. Window and the engine stopped. The door slammed shut. Mom's here, Tobin sighed. I'm in trouble now. I'll talk to her, I promised, though I wasn't sure Hermina would listen. The doorbell rang insistently and sharply. I went to open it, and Tobin followed, clearly not wanting to face his angry mother. Mina was standing on the doorstep, pale, puffy-eyed, wearing a hastily thrown coat over her house clothes. Her hair was disheveled, and her gaze darted frantically around until it stopped, on Tobin, who was peering out from behind me. Tobin. She rushed to her son, knelt down, and hugged him tightly. Are you okay? Are you okay? Oh my God, I almost freaked out when I found that note. I'm fine, Mom, the boy mumbled awkwardly, hugging her back. I'm sorry I scared you. Mina pulled away from him, holding him by the shoulders. And now there was anger in her gaze. How could you do that? Go out at night alone on a bicycle. Do you have any idea what could have happened? Cars, people on the road? I knew the road, Tobin replied stubbornly, and I had to talk to Grandpa. It was important. Mina shifted her gaze to me, and I saw the accusation in it. You put him up to it, called him when I wasn't around. Of course not. I shook my head, trying to speak calmly. I was as surprised as you were when he showed up on my doorstep. I called you as soon as I found out what was going on. She studied my face as if trying to find signs of lying, then turned back to her son. Pack up. We're going home. And believe me, young man, we're going to have a very serious conversation about your behavior. Mom, please. Tobin grabbed her hand. Don't be mad at Grandpa. It wasn't his fault. I wanted to apologize for the bird and say, I don't want you two to see each other again. I love you both. I saw Amina's face soften. Something like regret flashed in her eyes. She stroked her son's head. Tobin, adult relationships can be very complicated sometimes. You shouldn't feel responsible for what's going on between me and Grandpa, but I don't want us not to visit him anymore, the boy said stubbornly. You promised we'd go fishing this summer and we'll come to Grandpa's birthday party too, giving me a quick glance. We'll talk about that later. Okay, right now, we have to go home. It's really late and you have school tomorrow. I'll load his bike in the trunk, I offered, trying to be helpful. Thank you, Mina nodded. And it was the first time all evening that she had addressed me without obvious hostility. While I pulled Tobin's bike out of the bushes where he'd hidden it and loaded it into the trunk of her car, Mina helped her son put on his jacket and shoes. I could hear their muffled conversation but couldn't make out the words. When they got out, Tobin ran up to me and gave me a big hug. Bye, Grandpa. I'll miss you. Me too, baby. I awkwardly stroked his head. Be good boy and obey your mommy, okay? He nodded and reluctantly let go of me, heading towards the car. Hermina stood nearby, watching us with an unreadable expression on her face. Hermina, I began, not knowing exactly what I wanted to say. Yeah, not now, Daddy, she shook her head. I'm too tired and upset. We both need time to think. I understand, I nodded. But please don't stop me from seeing Tobin. It's not his fault. She looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. I will not use my own son as a weapon in our disagreement. With you. It would be unfair to him. But I need time to think things through, to decide how we're going to move forward. Thank you, I said sincerely. That's all I ask. She nodded and walked to the car. Tobin was already in the back seat, face pressed against the window, looking at me with a longing that made my heart clench. I waved at him, and he waved back, smiling weakly. Mina got behind the wheel, started the engine, and slowly pulled away. I stood in the driveway, staring at the receding taillights until they disappeared around the corner. Only then did I return to the house, which seemed empty and cold again. But something had changed. After talking to Tobin, after his simple and wise words of forgiveness, after his obvious love for me, despite all my faults, I felt something new stirring inside, something akin to hope. I went upstairs to the bedroom where the scattered photos still lay scattered about. I gathered them up and put them neatly back in the box. All but one, a snapshot of the three of us. Me, dear Ray, and little Mina on a picnic. We're all smiling, even me, usually reserved in photographs. It was one of those rare moments when I allowed myself to just enjoy life without thinking about rules and standards. I placed the photo on my bedside table and lay down, knowing sleep would not come. Too many thoughts swirled in my head, too many emotions bubbling in my soul. But for the first time in a long time, those thoughts were not exclusively bitter. In the midst of them flickered a spark of hope, the hope that perhaps all was not yet lost, that perhaps with the wisdom and simplicity of a child, Tobin had shown me a path to reconciliation that I myself had been unable to find in all these years. I closed my eyes, remembering my grandson's embrace, his tears, his words of forgiveness, and I swore to myself that I would do everything I could to right my wrongs, even if it meant stepping over my own pride. Admitting I was wrong, learning to listen to and understand other people's feelings, even if it was the hardest task of my life, because Tobin was worth the effort, because maybe my relationship with her mind was still salvageable too, because I was finally beginning to realize that I had been wrong all these years to put my own righteousness ahead of the feelings of the people closest to me. The morning found me still awake with eyes red from sleeplessness, but with a strange sense of determination in my heart. Determination to change, to try to be a better person. Not for my own sake, but for Tobin and Hermine's, for the possibility of not losing the last connections I had left in this world. The morning greeted me with gray light filtering in through the loose curtains. I don't remember when I fell asleep. I think it was just before morning. Exhausted from thinking and remembering, my mouth was dry and my head was buzzing with sleep. The clock read 7:30, unacceptably late by my standards. But a day's routine seemed pointless. The events of last night were replaying in my head like fragments of a nightmare. Tobin arriving secretly on his bicycle. Mina appearing on the doorstep, with a look of despair and anger on her face. Their departure into the darkness of the night. The thought that I might never see my grandson again echoed with a dull ache in my chest. I slowly got out of bed, feeling my joints protesting. Age was taking its toll, especially after a sleepless night. From the bathroom mirror, a haggarded face with red eyes and deep wrinkles looked back at me. When had I gotten so old? When had time that seemed endless suddenly shrunk to these last years of loneliness? Going down to the kitchen, I automatically turned on the kettle. The familiar movements performed thousands of times required no conscious participation. Making the tea, cutting the bread, buttering the bread, ordinary actions on an unusual morning. Tobin's mug still stood on the table with the dried remnants of the cocoa he'd drunk the night before. I didn't bother to put it away, a strange, sentimental desire to preserve traces of his being here, as if leaving things untouched would hold the illusion that he would return. I couldn't stop thinking about Hermina's words before we left. I need time to think things over, to decide how we're going to move forward. What did that mean? Was there any hope left for reconciliation, or was it just a way to gently end the conversation? The ringing of the phone snapped me out of my reverie. I hurried to the receiver, feeling a strange excitement. Could it have been Hermina? Did she want to continue our conversation after a night of reflection? "Hall is here," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. "Baxter, it's Gwyneth," came the familiar voice of the neighbor. "I saw your daughter's car come in last night. Is everything okay?" I sighed, feeling both disappointed and relieved at the same time. Tobin ran away from home and came to see me. Mina came to fetch him. "Oh my God!" she exclaimed. "Is the boy all right? How did he get to you on a bicycle?" I still couldn't believe it myself. Can you believe it? 9 years old and such determination. "You don't realize the danger at that age," said Gwyneth. "Or poor Armina must have been frantic with worry." Yes, she was very upset. I didn't go into details about my relationship with my daughter. Despite years of being neighbors, Gwyneth remained an outsider to the story. "If you need company, I could come over," she suggested. "I'll bring a freshly baked pie." You shouldn't be alone after such a shock. I wanted to refuse out of habit, preferring solitude to company, but suddenly I realized I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts. Not tonight. "Thank you, Gwyneth. That would be helpful." We agreed that she'd come by after lunch, and I hung up the phone, surprised at my own decision. I'd never sought solace in the company of other people before. Even after Dira's death, I had preferred to deal with my grief alone, rejecting all attempts by neighbors and few friends to offer support. What had changed? Perhaps Tobin's words of forgiveness and reconciliation touched something deep inside me, or maybe I was just tired of being alone, tired of the walls I'd built around myself over the years. After eating breakfast, I went out into the garden. The morning was cool but clear. The rain that had drizzled last night had stopped, leaving a freshness in the air and drops of water on the leaves. I headed toward the old apple tree under which dear Ray had once buried our thrush. The box with the dead bird still stood in the living room, untouched since yesterday. I went back into the house and got it and a shovel from the shed. It was time to put this cruel symbol of our broken relationship with Hermina into the ground. Digging was not difficult. The earth, softened by the rain, gave way easily. I dug a small hole near where Deirdre's bird had been buried. The old stone she had used to mark the grave was still in place, though covered in moss over the years. I opened the box one last time. A dead thrush lay on a bed of newspapers, small and harmless. It was hard to believe that such a tiny creature could have caused so much pain and destruction. But it wasn't the bird, of course. It was just a catalyst. The last drop in a cup that had been filled with years of misunderstanding, resentment, and bitterness. Carefully, I took the bird out, placed it in the hole, and began to cover it with soil. Each handful of soil felt like a weight on my heart. I wasn't just bearing a bird. I was bearing the hope of reconciliation with my daughter, of rebuilding the family I had destroyed with my coldness and inability to express love. Finished, I placed a small stone next to the one that marked the grave of Deirdre's bird. 2 stones, 2 symbols of my failures as a husband and father. I stood for a moment longer, looking at the freshly dug earth, then slowly wandered back toward the house. In the living room, my gaze fell on the card Tobin had given me to the best grandpa in the world. How naive and trusting my grandson was. He saw me for what I never was, a loving, understanding, kind person. He didn't know about the years of coldness and criticism I had heaped on his mother. He didn't understand why she so desperately wanted to shield him from my influence. I picked up the card and stared at the child's drawing for a long time. Tobin and I holding hands under the smiling sun. The world as the child saw it, simple, bright, full of love. A world I had lost so long ago that I had almost forgotten it existed. Time stretched slowly. I tried to occupy myself with the usual things, reading the newspaper, watching television, even trying to solve the crossword puzzle Deary had once cut out of a magazine. But my thoughts kept returning to Hermina and Tobin, to yesterday's events, to the words that had been spoken and that had gone unspoken. About 3 in the afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Gwyneth, true to her promise, came in with a cake and a thermos of freshly brewed tea. Her kindness and directness had always made me a little uncomfortable, but today I was grateful for the human presence that diluted the oppressive silence of the house. "You don't look well, Baxter," she said, setting the cups on the table. "Been up all night, I suppose?" "Almost," I admitted. "It was a lot to think about." Gwyneth nodded without needing an explanation. Family matters are always the most complicated, especially when children are involved. We sat in the kitchen eating cake and drinking tea. Gwyneth told me the local news, without requiring me to take an active part in the conversation, for which I was grateful. Her presence was soothing, like soft music in the background, distracting me from my heavy thoughts. "You know," she said suddenly, interrupting a story about a new store in town. "When my husband died, I thought I'd never recover. The world seemed empty and meaningless. But then I realized that life goes on whether you want it to or not. And the only thing you can do is decide how you want to live your remaining time in bitterness and loneliness, or trying to find small joys every day. I looked at her, surprised by this sudden turn in the conversation. "And you chose joy?" "Not right away." She smiled. "It was a long journey. But yes, I chose joy in the end. And you know, Baxter, I've never regretted that choice." There was something in her words that made me think. A choice. It all came down to choice. I'd always considered myself a man of principles, a man who followed rules and standards. But what if it was also a choice? A choice of rigidity over flexibility, of criticism over understanding, of coldness over warmth. "Thank you, Gwyneth," I said, sincerely, for the pie and for the advice. She nodded understandingly. "You're welcome, neighbor. Sometimes it helps to hear someone else's story to better understand your own." After she left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, thinking about choices and their consequences, about roads not traveled because of fear or pride, of opportunities missed because of an inability to see beyond my own nose. The evening came quietly. I went upstairs to the guest room where Amina and Tobin were sleeping. The bed was neatly made. Amina had always been as pedantic about such things as I was. On the nightstand was Tobin's forgotten drawing, a sketch of our house with a large apple tree in the background. I picked up the drawing and stared at it for a long time, childish, naive, but full of love and attention to detail. Tobin had even drawn my old Shaw's lounge under the apple tree where I like to lounge on warm days. With that drawing in hand, I walked back to my bedroom. I pulled an old photo album from my bedside table and began flipping through the pages, looking at the faces in the pictures. Dear Dre with baby Mina in her arms, Mina in her school uniform on her first day at school. A family trip to the seaside where we are all smiling while holding ice cream. When did everything change? When did I stop seeing the joy in these moments and start noticing only the flaws and inconsistencies in my standards? When did I stop hugging my daughter and start only criticizing her choices? There were no answers, only emptiness and the realization that I was missing something important, something fundamental in my life, something that most people take for granted, the ability to love unconditionally, to accept imperfections, to rejoice in simple moments. I closed the album and walked to the window. It was already dark outside, and all I could see was my reflection in the glass. An old man with slumped shoulders and tired eyes. A man who had spent his life building walls instead of bridges, who was so afraid of appearing weak that he preferred to appear callous. The phone downstairs rang, snapping me out of my musings. I hurried downstairs, hoping it was Hermina, that maybe she'd decided to give us another chance. "Hollis here," I said, trying not to let my voice betray my excitement. "Dad, it's me." Hermine's voice sounded tired but calm. "I thought I should call to talk about what happened." "Thank you," I said sincerely. "Yeah, I've been thinking about it too, about us, about everything." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, imagined her sitting in her living room, probably with a cup of tea gathering her thoughts. "Tobin is very upset," she finally said. "He doesn't understand why we can't just make up." "Out of the mouth of babes," I replied quietly. "Children often see things that escape adults." "Yes." A note of surprise flickered in her voice, as if she hadn't expected that answer. "Ah, but adult relationships are more complicated than kids fighting on the playground." "No doubt," I agreed. "But maybe they should be simpler in some ways. Maybe we complicate things by clinging to past hurts, not wanting to admit our mistakes, not knowing how to ask for forgiveness." There's a pause again, even longer than the previous one. I could practically see Hermina trying to make sense of my words to see if they were sincere or just another manipulation. "Dad," she finally said, and I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "Do you really think we can fix this after all these years?" After all that's been said and done, I took a deep breath. I don't know, Armina. I honestly don't, but I want to try. For Tobin's sake, for us. Yeah, I don't want to die, knowing that I never got to have a relationship with my only daughter. It's not going to be easy, she warned me. We have so many unresolved issues, so many unspoken grievances. I know, I nodded, though she couldn't see it. And I'm willing to work on it. I'm ready to listen, not just talk. Ready to admit my mistakes. Yeah, I don't know, Dad. Her voice shook. Part of me wants to believe that it's possible that we can start over. But the other part remembers all those years of trying to earn your approval, your love. And I was never good enough. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. Did she really feel that way? Was I really so blind that I couldn't see how my daughter desperately needed my acceptance, my love? I'm sorry, Armina, I said quietly. I'm so sorry that I made you feel like you weren't good enough. You've always been the best thing that ever happened in my life. I just didn't know how to show it. I heard her squeeze out a surrendered sob on the other end of the line. Hermina was crying. My strong, independent daughter who always held herself with such dignity. Dad, I have to go, she said quickly. Tobin's calling. We'll talk later. Okay. Sure. I knew she needed time to process our conversation. Take care of yourself. And Tobin and you take care of yourself, she said before hanging up. I slowly put the phone down, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Hope and fear, relief and anxiety, joy and sadness, all intertwined in a tangle that was impossible to untangle. Was this the first step toward reconciliation, or was it just a polite conversation after which everything would remain the same? Would we be able to overcome years of resentment and misunderstanding, or was the gulf between us too wide? I didn't know the answers to these questions, but for the first time in a long time, I felt that maybe all was not lost. That maybe there was a chance to right at least some of the wrongs I'd done. I went back into the bedroom, took Tobin's drawing, and framed it on the bedside table next to Diarra's picture. The two most important women in my life, and the boy who would probably be the bridge that would connect the broken bonds of our family. As I fell asleep, I thought about the choice. About how, even at 67, it's not too late to change course. To try to become a better person. To learn to see with my heart and not just my eyes. About how perhaps the most important thing in life is not rightness, but love. Not standards, but acceptance. Not control, but trust. I woke up this morning with the feeling that something important had changed. Not in my life, not yet in myself. It was as if something that had been asleep for so long had finally awakened. Something I had buried so deeply that I had almost forgotten it existed. I got up and went to the window. The sun was just beginning to rise, coloring the sky in delicate shades of pink and gold. A new day, new opportunities, new choices. I didn't know what the future would bring, whether Mina and I could really work things out or if it would remain a pipe dream. Whether she would let me be a part of Tobin's life or decide the risk was too great. All I knew was that I no longer wanted to be the man I'd been my whole life. The man who put rules and standards before feelings. Ammon who doesn't know how to express love and understanding. A man who builds walls instead of bridges. Was it too late for such a change? Perhaps it was. But even so, I had to try for Hermine, for Tobin, for myself. I went down to the kitchen, made tea, and sat at the table, looking at the garden through the window. The old apple tree under which two birds now rested, symbols of my mistakes and missed opportunities. The bed of roses that Dearie had once planted, and that I had maintained all these years, as if it were the last thread linking me to her. Father's Day, which was supposed to be a day of family togetherness, turned into a day of revelations and painful truths. But maybe that's what was needed. Maybe sometimes you need to hit rock bottom in order to push back and start climbing. I didn't know what would happen next. Allie knew was that I was willing to try, ready to change, ready to learn how to be not just right, but kind. Not just strong, but understanding. Not just a father and grandfather in blood, but in spirit. And maybe someday I'll see Tobin smile again, hear his laughter in this house. Maybe someday Hermina will be able to forgive me and let me start over. Maybe all is not yet lost. With that hope, fragile as a bird's wings, but so important, I began a new day. A day that could have been the first of the rest of my life, or just another day in an endless string of lonely days. The choice, as always, was mine.